In today's video, I'll be talking about improving communication in relationships. For those of you who are new, my name's Casey Lepper, and I share different tips or topics about mind, spirit, body improvement. Today, we're going to dive into communication. Now, communication is a really big topic, but for the sake of today's video, I'm going to be sharing about why communication is important, what it's really doing, some practical tips to understand how to have better communication, and something very important, conversational styles. So knowing what type of conversation you're in and how knowing that allows you to know how to listen, knows what your partner or the person you're talking to really needs from you. So let's jump in. For any relationship to be satisfying and really healthy, we need good communication. And so first of all, it's good to know what communication is about. Good communication is about understanding. And when we seek to understand, if we actually remain curious as to what someone's saying, you can actually track the neural networks and how they shift to be in alignment with the person talking. And almost every couple I've ever worked with comes in and says the first thing that they need to work on is communication. Communication is the cornerstone of all good relationships. And regardless of if you need help in a different area, being able to talk about the other areas that maybe not working so well or where you have conflict, it's really important to start with communication. First, I want to share some more information about how to build an understanding around communication and what elements actually make up good communication. And we'll start by defining communication. Communication in relationships refers to the exchange of information, of thoughts, feelings, and ideas between individuals involved in some type of relationship. And now effective communication plays a really crucial role in being able to not only build, but maintain a healthy relationship. Fostering understanding, bringing in more trust and intimacy and overall connection is what inevitably happens when communication is flowing. So communication in and of itself involves verbal, nonverbal, and active listening. Verbal communication is what I'm doing. It's spoken or written words that convey different messages that helps us express our thoughts, communicate our needs, our desires. It can include conversations, discussions, different expressions with written words, so text messages, emails, letters. And it is a direct way that we can share affection, share requests, and just overall share information. So verbal communication can be direct or indirect, assertive or passive aggressive. And when we're talking to someone or when we're listening to someone, we want to be able to pay attention to tone, language, and delivery of the message. So some of these elements like vocabulary, how our tone changes, our pitch, our volume, pacing, clarity of speech, all is involved with our verbal communication. Now, the nonverbal is our body language. It's our gestures, our facial expressions, whether we have eye contact, how our posture is, and different nonverbal cues that convey messages and emotions. Now, nonverbal cues often convey information in and of themselves. It can complement or contradict what the verbal expression is. And it always gives us the ability to bring in more context to any type of communication. When I'm nodding, when I'm smiling, if I'm frowning, shrugging, touching, maintaining eye contact, all of that gives you nonverbal cues to either stop talking, that I'm listening to you, that I'm understanding you, or that I'm distracted. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone and while you're talking, they pick up their phone? That immediately conveys that they're not interested. They're not saying anything, but that nonverbal cue gives you information that they don't care. And so when we're in a dialogue with someone, we want to make sure to be able to be a true listener. And that's what communication is about, right? It's about being able to seek to understand what the other person is saying. And so when you're in a conversation with someone, give them your undivided attention. Maintaining eye contact is another really good nonverbal cue. If I'm looking at someone talking to them and I'm nodding, I am telling them that they're safe, that I'm interested, that I'm listening, and ultimately they will feel heard. And now what I said in the beginning, when you are really, really understanding and you're really, really empathizing with what someone is saying, your neural network is starting to change its rhythm to mirror the rhythm and the neural network and the brainwaves of the other person. So communication really gives us a sense of connection. And when we're, in a fight, say, what type of nonverbal cues do you give? If you're mad at your partner and they're talking and your nervous system is dysregulated, if your ego has been activated, what type of language, what type of body language do you come at the conversation with? Do you have eye contact? Do you nod? Are you smiling? Are you frowning? Are you closed off? What's your nonverbal communication saying? Also being able to pay attention to tone and pitch. So everyone that's been in a romantic relationship, usually with conflict, there is something said over and over in every couple, and that's you have to watch your tone. The problem with that is tone can have a lot of perspective in it. It can be really subjective. But ultimately, the thing I want you to take away from this is pay attention to all of these pieces. If you can't get your point across to someone that you're talking to and you're feeling like they're not listening, consider that. Awareness gives you information, and being able to understand how you're maybe not listening well or you're not speaking in a way that's allowing the other person to listen or to be clear about your message can be really, really impactful in changing how you're communicating. Along these same lines is active listening. So often, if I'm sitting in front of a couple, one person will be talking and I can tell when the other person is no longer listening. They're either completely distracted, like looking around the room, or they're focusing on one thing that person has said and they are building a case against it. So if that person is just trying to process and said something that actually isn't that important, that they really don't feel, and meanwhile they're figuring it out and turning it around and that other person has stopped listening, that's how the majority of fights start, is because a person pulls at one thread that really wasn't the thread that needed to be pulled at. They stopped listening, and all of a sudden, both egos are activated. Everyone's feeling a little bit more agitated. Their nervous system's dysregulated. And that's when we stop being in harmony and we start to conflict with each other. Active listening is a skill. And so if you have a hard time being really, really present, what I say is, if your partner is talking about something you know is important, sit back and in your mind say, this isn't about me. This isn't about building a case. This is about understanding where they're coming from and seeking understanding. And sometimes with our partner, we don't do this so well because there's more ego involved. With a child, maybe we can sit back and we really listen to what they're saying. The truth is we need to have that presence, that mindset of curiosity with everyone that we're talking with. Because if we remain curious, it's much easier to stay in an active listening state. And so if your mind is going every which way, write down. John Gottman is a famous researcher with couples, and he writes down what his wife is saying. He makes sure that what he is hearing is what she is saying. And so being able to say, hey, stop. I just want to make sure that I'm getting this right. This is what you're saying. This is what you're meaning. And if you have that approach, while it does take practice and it doesn't always go perfectly, you'll be able to sidestep so many miscommunications and mistranslations, and you'll be able to get the heart of the message. When you get the heart of the message, usually we're much more engaged, we're much more empathetic, and we're less likely to devolve into some fight or argument. So to summarize this section, be aware of your verbal communication, your nonverbal communication, and your ability to actively listen. Be direct in your message, but pay attention to your cadence, the rhythm in which you're speaking. And then if you're listening, pay attention to how you're showing up. Do you feel closed off? Are you distracted? Are you engaged? Are you looking at the person? Being aware of all these pieces will really help the other person who's talking to you feel safe. And in return, they're much more likely to give you the same space and awareness when you're talking to them. In addition to these elements that help good communication are different conversational styles or different types of conversations. And I like to bring this into session because it's really helpful knowing if I come home and I'm trying to talk to my husband about an emotional conversation, but he's thinking it is a more logistical, logical one, then we're kind of in two different dimensions. And that's when mistranslation, miscommunication is most likely to occur. So when you're aware of these different types, you can really be present and ask yourself, what is the other person seeking in this? Are they just seeking to be understood? Or their emotions to be held? Or are we problem solving? Are we trying to understand and get to a solution on the other side of this conversation? So these conversations are surface level. Now think about this as the casual, superficial topic that you have with someone, and you're really not about diving into deeper issues or different emotions. The quintessential talking about the weather, like different mundane subjects like routines, current events. You're more likely to have these surface level conversations with people who are strangers or acquaintances. They can serve as icebreakers or maybe like a social lubricant so you can feel like you can get into a deeper subject. But in general, they lack depth. They don't really foster any meaningful relationship or connection. So now we have problem-solving conversations that is about addressing specific issues, different challenges or conflicts in a more collaborative manner. So people who are in these types of conversations are seeking to work together to not only identify problems and analyze root causes, but also brainstorm solutions and make decisions. These require active listening, like I already talked about, more critical thinking and open-mindedness. So that curiosity is a key component in being able to problem solve with someone. Emotional conversations focus on exploring and expressing our feelings, our emotions, and our personal experiences. So a lot of times these emotional conversations bring up vulnerability, our fears, our joys, our concerns in a safe, supportive environment. Now, these types of conversations, it's really important to pay attention to your nonverbal, your verbal, and your active listening skills. Because if done right, you feel empathized with, you feel understood, and there's a greater bond that's created between people, leading to more trust, more intimacy. Identity conversations revolve around exploring and defining your values, your beliefs, your goals, your sense of self. So when you're having this type of conversation, a lot of times there's reflection on who you believe you are, your aspirations, maybe your strengths and weaknesses, different core principles. And so this type of style or this type of conversation really encourages you to be self-aware, to have introspection, and to personally grow. In session with a lot of my clients, this type of identity conversation is usually at play. And so those different conversations really help, I think, give you some nice buckets at paying attention to and being able to ask yourself, what type of conversation is this? If you're coming into an experience and you're in more of an emotional place and the other person's in a more problem-solving place, then sometimes you can be disappointed. And so that awareness allows people to be able to navigate interactions more effectively. And as a result, you're able to nurture more meaningful relationships. And so overall, effective communication in relationships encompasses being aware of all these different things. So not just your verbal and nonverbal forms of expression, also your active listening, your ability to be able to convey messages in a clear, respectful, and empathetic way. If you're able to do that with your closest relationships, you're more likely to feel harmonious, fulfilled, and satisfied. So this awareness, ask yourself, how good of a communicator are you? And if you aren't able to communicate really clearly, what type of conversation gets in the way? Is it more emotional conversations that get in the way? And then you can ask yourself, Is there a place where you're not feeling open to express, or you're feeling fear of vulnerability? And then you have to ask yourself, the person I'm sharing with, is there anything about them that they're doing or not doing that doesn't make me feel safe to share? And so the biggest piece of this is just to understand communication is complicated. And not all of us have had the best examples of how to communicate, especially with those emotional identity conversations. And so if you're in a relationship, whether it's a romantic, familial, work, colleague related, pay attention to your communication skills. Be an empathetic listener. Seek to understand and be curious. And if you're able to maintain that, then you're more likely going to build all the different relationships around you, because not only are they going to feel like you're a safe space, that you understand, that you seek to understand, you're going to find the people that you can really share with, and in both a personal and a professional setting. So communication is a really, really big topic. This was just hitting the surface. Some big keys to just pay attention to start. And then later down the road, I'll bring more communication information that can help you overcome conflict, to become more vulnerable, and to express even better. Thank you for joining today's conversation. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and send it to anyone you think might benefit.